In this video, we'll take a look at the creation and deletion of environments. After the API credentials have helped create the Control Hub object, SCH in this case, we can look at the required methods that are used for building an environment. We use a construct called getEnvironmentBuilder and the subsequent build method on top of that. We then have to add this environment to our Control Hub object and finally activate that environment. For example, these are the commands we will need to actually generate an environment. This will create a new environment even if the name already exists. Environment names do not need to be unique. We set up an environment name. We set up an Environment Builder instance name to store an Environment Builder instance. The environment type is self-managed or self. Set up an environment instance which uses the Environment Builder object we've created and uses the build method from that object. It uses the environment name that we pick up here. Specify a simple environment tag and set the Allow Nightly Engine Builds to false. In fact, the same settings you would select within the UI. A simple print statement to say that we're adding the environment to our SCH object. And we're activating the environment using the SCH instance as well. Let's look back in the Control Hub window and see what current environments exist first before we run it. All we have is the default environment, and so far we have no deployments. Let's go back to our PyCharm environment and let's run this script. We should get an environment called myTestEnd1 created in Control Hub when we run this script. So we had adding environment and activating environment. Let's have a look in Control Hub. And you can see here we got myTestEnd1. If we rerun this script, then it will create a duplicate environment. Let's run the script again. And as you can see, we get processed finished with exit code 0. Back in Control Hub, do a refresh. And you can see we got the same environment again. We have a duplicate created. Because environments do not have to be unique in name, we could change the script to not create this environment if it exists already with that name. But essentially the same functions will be needed. Environment Builder, build, add environment, and activate environment. In the following code, we can call other functions that help to determine and retrieve existing environments, such as environments.get, that we can use to help determine the existence of a particular environment before trying to create it. Let's look at the following code. Before we examine this code, let's remove the environments we've created in Control Hub. Take these two environments and remove them. Back in PyCharm. The code is essentially the same as before, but before we activate an environment, we want to make sure it does not already exist. This part of the code extracts all the environments that exist in Control Hub, and will pick out and put into an array the environment's name. Once we have this array of environment names, we can cycle through them in a for loop and test for each one. We test, is the environment name the same as our environment name set further up? If it is, then it exists, and we set a flag to indicate this. Then, if that flag is set, we know the environment exists. We will just retrieve the details of it and make it our currently selected environment for later use. If it does not exist, then we can do what we did on our first run of code earlier and add and activate that new environment into Control Hub. Let's try this out. On first run, this should create our new environment. Because it does not exist, we just deleted them, remember? Checking if environment myNewEnd1 exists. myNewEnd1 does not exist. So adding the environment myNewEnd1 and activating the environment myNewEnd1. Let's go into Control Hub to see the results. Do a refresh again, and as before we have myNewEnd1, We'll go back and rerun the script now. Checking if environment myNewEnv1 exists. myNewEnv1 does exist. It retrieves the details of that environment, but it doesn't do anything with it yet until we actually come to do a deployment. That will be the next step. So in Control Hub, we should not have a second environment with the same name as we had before. When I do a refresh, and you can see we still only have the one instance of it. Now let's take a look at deleting an existing environment. The code you can see here will pick up an existing environment and deactivate it, and then finally delete it. We pick up all the environments. We loop through all these environments to make sure that our environment does actually exist. We set a flag. If that flag is set, we say the environment does exist. We get the details of that environment, and then we actually deactivate it with the deactivate environment method. We then delete that environment with the delete environment method, and finally print out the environment ID that we're deleting. So let's run this. Remember, we have our myNewEnv1 environment existing in Control Hub. So when we run this, it tells us the environment exists. myNewEnv1 does exist. We're deactivating it. Then we are deleting it, and then printing out the environment ID. So when we go to Control Hub and we refresh, we can see that the environment has now disappeared. Thanks for watching.